our distinguished invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by taking you on a brief journey to review Nigeria's agricultural policy, beginning from colonial times. And I've grouped it into just decades. So 1861 to 1950s, only ad hoc attention was paid to agriculture. In the 50s and 60s, that's when we started attempt at diversification, research and extension services, strong public intervention to boost domestic production, especially of cash crops, targeted obviously at the export market. Nigeria was the top producer of rubber, groundnuts, palm oil, and the second largest of cocoa, among others. There was a renewed focus on livestock and fisheries. The first National Development Plan actually had a very strong focus on agriculture. In the 1970s and 80s, enter petroleum, especially the revenues, which came in after the 1973 Arab-Israeli wars. They began to become very substantial. Of course, that plus the lack of attention to agriculture, we started to go into decline in policy support and public funding for agriculture, strong decline in domestic production, rising level of dependence on agricultural imports. The marketing boards were used as taxation instruments to finance development, which was a disincentive itself to agricultural production. The Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Natural Resources was born to address some of the margin issues. Until then, agriculture used to be treated more of a state or regional activity. Then also entered the World Bank. And I think the World Bank has been criticized a lot for a lot of the things they have done. But certainly their role in agricultural development in Nigeria has been largely positive. The FADAMA program, for example, I personally think is a resounding success. Continuing with the 1970s and 80s, we tried to boost production through subsidized inputs and community development and subsidized credit. Just some benchmarks there, or milestones. In 1972, we had the National Accelerated Food Production Program. 1973, the birth of the Nigerian Agricultural Bank, which has metamorphosed about 3-4 times into today's Bank of Agriculture. We created the River Basin Development Authorities in 1976. I'm sure we all remember the Green Revolution, 1979 to 1983. And the Directorate of Food, Roads, and Rural Infrastructure, otherwise called DIFRI. From the 1990s to date, agriculture has been identified in almost all our development plans, both in the medium and long terms, as a critical sector. We all recall the 1999 presidential initiatives. It was almost like every 2 weeks there was one new presidential initiative or the other. There were about 7 on cassava, on rice, on sugar. The needs document, the 7-point agenda, the Vision 2020, the transformation agenda. And sorry, that's 2011. Now you've heard from the minister. We have the agricultural transformation agenda. To complicate matters, there are also some external considerations. Preferential agreements in the framework of the World Trade Organizations, which tend to pretend as if free trade is something that everybody does, when in fact almost all the developed countries heavily subsidize their agricultural sector. The Economic Partnership Agreement that we have been struggling with Europe and the ACP countries to find some way of resolving this, and the complicated issues regarding our agriculture, regarding the CET negotiations and all that. NEPA's Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. Now, The Honorable Minister of Agriculture has touched on international experience. Because of lack of time, I actually looked at the cases of India, China, Brazil. And I've just given some examples here of Brazil. But one thing that came out is that a lot of the process we went through, they even went through them longer. Brazil was struggling to get it right from the early 1900s. China was struggling to get it right from about 500 BC. And they failed many times, including the famous famine that arose because of poor agricultural policies. But the example of Brazil actually shows that if you get it right, the dividends are huge. And I'm happy to hear the Honorable Minister of Agriculture says that Brazil is coming to learn something from us. But while we are teaching them, we also have quite a lot to learn from them. But we are doing it. You see, the focus on the entire value chain, which the Honorable Minister has outlined. World-class scientists, the use of science, applying science to agriculture. Massive improvement in yields. Today, Brazil is only using 12% of its arable land. And yet, it is the biggest, in terms of world exports, #1 position in about 7 areas, and #2 in 2 areas, and a lot more. Third, fourth, fifth in many of those areas. And look at the share of the world market that they have been able to achieve.